The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the small Atlanta church as sunlight poured through stained glass, casting colorful patches on the polished wooden pews. And Rosalind, in her early 20s, smiled softly, feeling as if she had stepped into her own fairy tale. She had always believed that love could conquer anything, that her marriage to Jerome would be a sanctuary built on support and unwavering devotion. Yet beneath her hopeful exterior, she sensed a quiet distance in Jerome's eyes when she brought up the possibility of starting a family. His dismissive shrug, the way he avoided her gaze, left her with an uneasy feeling she refused to acknowledge, clinging instead to the memory of their wedding day, the aroma of home-cooked dinner filling their modest apartment, the warm sunlight lighting up his face as he promised forever. Despite his coldness and the subtle hints of emotional neglect, Rosalind pressed on, supporting him silently, convincing herself that love was enough. She told herself that perhaps their struggles with infertility were just a temporary storm, that her unwavering support would bridge the growing gap. Still, a quiet voice inside questioned if her devotion was enough to hold their fragile dream together, or if the signs she ignored were quietly unraveling the very foundation of her hopes, hinting that their perfect picture might be built on something far less genuine than she had believed. In the quiet hush of their living room, a row of framed baby pictures lined the mantel, each tiny grin and coo serving as a silent chorus, reminding Rosalind how fiercely she longed to join their ranks. Months had slipped past since she first stood in that sterile hallway of the clinic, clutching a trembling test result that offered no answers, and during that time she had watched hope ebb and flow like a hidden tide. Jerome had grown more distant, his compliments once warm and frequent now, few and clipped as he tossed aside her concerns about the bruises on her arms and the aches that settled into her bones, insisting she was imagining things or that she was too sensitive for the stress of their new life together. She pressed soft kisses to his temple before he left for work, brushing a stray hair from his forehead, and she told herself that love was equal parts courage and forgiveness. As she traced the gentle curve of his collarbone while he slept that night, Rosalind felt a tremor of doubt slip through her optimism, a question whispering whether devotion alone could withstand the growing distance between them. She recalled her grandmother's advice about nurturing partnerships like gardens, soaking seeds in hope and watering them with trust. But she also sensed that some roots concealed rot beneath the surface. Could her unwavering support be enough to keep their bond alive? This chapter unfolded in muted tones of sunshine and quiet aspiration, laying bare the first cracks in her picture-perfect wedding portrait, and it left her with a simple, aching question about the strength of love in the face of hidden neglect. If this quiet journey through Rosalind's unwavering support resonated with you, consider subscribing to stay with us as her story unfolded. And as the evening light lingered through lace curtains, she closed her eyes and wondered whether tomorrow's dawn would bring reassurance or a revelation she could no longer ignore. Rosalind had watched the mantel above the fireplace grow heavier with photographs of friends' newborns before she dared imagine that one of those smiling faces might be hers. Months had drifted by since the first doctor's appointment, each appointment building tension she carried in the small ache behind her ribs. Their home, painted in soft creams and pale blues, felt emptier with every whispered conversation Jerome shut down with a curt nod or a tossed newspaper. He had insisted that tests were an unnecessary worry, that nature would take its course if she relaxed. Jerome's impatience grew sharper by the day, his dismissals turning to harsh words that bit into her confidence until she doubted her worth. Once he had traced a finger along the bruise, blooming on her side, and muttered that she was losing her mind, leaving her to cradle her dignity like a broken doll. After a failed round of treatments left her exhausted and bruised from needle sticks, Rosalind wandered into the living room at twilight to find the baby pictures still staring back at her, their frames dusted but unchanging, and she pressed her palm against the cool glass over a photograph of a tiny hand wrapped around a parent's finger, an image that made her chest ache with both yearning and sorrow. At night, when the moonlight pooled on the lace curtains in their bedroom, she pressed her palm to her belly and whispered pleas into the darkness, wanting so badly to feel a flutter or a gentle pulse. Instead, her skin felt hollow, as if her body sensed its own betrayals and held them close. One afternoon, she found a chance to slip away to the clinic she had once visited for routine checkups, drafting an excuse about a friend's appointment at work. The corridor she walked was cold, every step echoing under fluorescent lights, the hush around her broken only by the distant beep of monitors. Rosalind pressed her fingers against the reception desk, her heart thumping like a frantic bird, and asked for the tests that Jerome would not allow. The nurse offered her a faint smile, as though she recognized the courage it took to insist on one's own body, and led her into a small room where the pale walls closed in. She lay on a narrow table beneath a folded blanket, feeling naked without knowing why, while the doctor explained in gentle tones that some of her hormone levels were lower than expected, that the tiny shifts of progesterone could mean long waits or more anxiety, and that early intervention might help. Rosalind nodded, tears she refused to shed prickling her eyelashes. She filed the papers in her purse and left before the gravity of the news weighed upon her. When she returned home, she found Jerome reading in the study, his back turned. She held out the results and watched the pages flutter like trapped birds as he skimmed them. He exhaled impatiently and placed the paperwork face down. His fingers tapped the surface of the desk. "More tests?" he murmured, voice flat. "You're turning this into an obsession." His glance carried a dismissive chill that cut deeper than any blade, and Rosalind's chest tightened so sharply she nearly dropped to her knees. She whispered she only wanted reassurance, then slipped away without waiting for his reply. That night, Jerome's frustration manifested in harsh words as he found her shelving a stack of parenting magazines she had furtively brought home. He accused her of ignoring the present to chase a fantasy of motherhood, of forgetting that they had enough to manage without adding dreams that might never come true. His anger turned physical when he brushed her arm too roughly while snatching the glossy pages away, and Rosalind felt a sting that made her breath hitch. She retreated to the living room, pressed against a window pane where streetlights cast long shadows across her face, and pressed her hands to her temples until the pulse of pain receded. She stared at the rows of photographs on the mantel. Each baby's dimpled grin and chubby cheek now felt like a silent accusation. In the cold hush of the house, she realized how little support she had, how easily her hopes were dismissed by the man she loved most. Her tears gathered but did not fall, building a reservoir of sorrow she carried like a secret wound. As she lay awake that night, the question that had hovered in the back of her mind grew louder. Was her worth truly measured by her ability to conceive, or could she find strength in choosing a different path? In that moment, her reflection in the hallway mirror looked foreign, her eyes rimmed with sleepless nights, her shoulders curved from carrying expectations. She touched the cool glass and felt something inside her shift, a fragile ember of resolve flickering to life, even as the house slept around her and the soft moonlight settled across lace curtains. By the soft glow of a single lamp, Rosalind sat at the wobbling kitchen table in the cramped apartment she shared with Jerome and their two young daughters, her slender fingers curling around a mountain of unpaid bills whose corners curled like autumn leaves. Faint trails of peeling wallpaper at the edge of the room whispered of promises long forgotten, and the plaster beneath her fingertips felt brittle, as though it might crumble under the weight of her unspoken fears. She glanced at Jerome's empty chair, its backrest scarred by the marks of years he had spent hunched over spreadsheets, and half-hearted spreadsheets tucked into battered folders, the numbers mocking him with each passing day. The rent notice lay open like a threat on top of the counter, its red stamp screaming final warning, while the electricity bill flickered in her head like a distant storm. She drew in a shaky breath and reached for the glass jar filled with her carefully counted savings, the heavy coins and folded bills weighing more than their value suggested, each one a testament to every skipped coffee, every lunch she packed at home, every bargaining match she had played at the grocery store. In her mind's eye, she saw a small house with a front porch and a swing where her daughters could chase fireflies, and she pictured herself holding her future child in her arms, cradling the miracle that had once seemed nothing more than a distant dream. Together, those visions drove her to pinch every penny from her meager teaching salary, and after months of practice in self-denial, she had reached her goal of $12,000, enough, she told herself, for a down payment on something solid, a foundation that might lift them out of the narrow margins they had inhabited since Jerome's hours had begun to shrink. But now, Jerome stood at the doorway beside her, jaw clenched, heart heavy with frustration. He spoke in low, urgent whispers, telling her that his business partner had come through at last with the plan that would solve all their troubles, that he needed her money to turn it from blueprint into profit before the window closed for good. Rosalind closed her eyes against the glare of worry that threatened to blind her, recalling the promises he had made on nights just like this, when he had curled his fingers around her hand and whispered that soon they would have a life where counting coins would seem as distant as a vague memory. She could feel how easily hope rose inside her, sweet and insistent, urging her to believe that this was the moment they had been waiting for, that everything could change with a single leap of faith. And yet a thread of anxiety wound itself around her heart, tightening as she remembered how her mother had warned her in tales of wild dreams and broken trust. Her palms grew slick with sweat as she fished out the small envelope where she had tucked her savings, its paper creased with care and trepidation. The air between them filled with an electric hush, thick as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jerome reached across the table, his fingers trembling as they brushed hers, and she felt the familiar mix of love and doubt surge through her. In that moment, she was both buoyed by the possibility of escape and dragged under by the fear of letting go. The worn edges of the envelope pressed into her palm as she slid it forward, the soft thud on the wooden surface echoing in the stillness. Her chest felt tight, each breath a measured sacrifice, and as she watched Jerome lift the envelope with reverence, she wondered whether she had made the only choice she could, or if she had just handed her dreams over to the hands of uncertainty. She held her breath and let it slip away, her heart drumming with hope, tangled in dread, both eager for the sunrise that might bring new beginnings and wary of the shadows that might lie beneath. 6 months after their modest start had begun to blossom into something neither of them could have fully imagined. Jerome stood in the doorway of their little suburban home as if he had suddenly grown 2 heads taller, a crisp charcoal suit draped over his broad shoulders and a grin that glinted with new confidence. He had come out of the boardroom with triumphant stories of expansion, of clients signing on with ease, of charts that pointed only up, and he beckoned Rosalind to follow him through the tidy hallway that still smelled of fresh paint and spilled hopes. Inside, she watched him admire the polished oak desk he had installed in the dining room when success felt safer than their old kitchen table, and she nodded with a smile that trembled because she wanted so much to believe in the shared dream they had once whispered about late at night. He reached for her hand, but his eyes flicked away toward the glass case, displaying his latest award, an engraved plaque he'd proudly hung where their wedding photographs used to be, and she felt a faint tightening in her chest. "This is just the beginning," he said, voice bright, as if announcing an heir to a throne, and she squeezed his fingers back, trying to imagine the life he described, one without cramped schedules or financial worry, one that might have space for them again. Yet in the hush after his words, she heard his phone ping, a soft, yet insistent reminder of messages she didn't want to know about, and she remembered how last week she had reached for him in bed, only to find an empty pillow and the whisper of an argument on his lips as he reminded her of evening meetings. She thought of the way he had introduced her last Thursday as his indispensable partner in company matters, but then immediately drifted into conversation with a new colleague named Veronica, whose laughter had lined her voice with a brassy confidence that made Rosalind's own smile waver like a candle in draft air. Rosalind had buried herself in her own work, polishing presentations for her non-profit job until her eyes burned, answering every late-night email because she needed to believe she was vital somewhere besides the periphery of Jerome's advancing empire. Every morning she woke early to prepare his coffee just the way he liked it, 2 cream, no sugar, and the faint aroma of espresso used to be a gentle punctuation in their calm routine, but now it felt like smoke in her lungs, marking the distance growing between them. Yesterday, she had realized the creases by his eyes deepened not from laughter shared with her, but from the glow of screens on which he scrolled messages that began with a wink emoji and ended unanswered by Rosalind. Her heart had skipped when she saw Veronica's name flash on his phone, then thudded heavily when it was met by a quick, curt response from him. Too curt to be simply business. Now, as she followed him through the sunny foyer toward the backyard where he had set up a lavish barbecue to celebrate their joint success, she grappled with a cold question shivering in her mind. Was this the life they had built together, or was he building something new that she would no longer fit into? Jerome raised a wine glass to toast them, his eyes bright with pride, and Rosalind lifted hers, breathing in the rich scent of red grapes, her gaze drifting to the children's swing set, standing empty beneath the elm tree. She felt the weight of their laughter from earlier in the afternoon, her son's delighted shriek as he soared through the air, her daughter's small cheers echoing, and she wondered how many more dreams she could share with Jerome before she lost the courage to ask for space in his ever-expanding world. She pressed her palm against the cool glass of the sliding door, the reflection showing a woman who wanted to speak, to confess how loneliness nestled in her chest like a hidden coin, waiting to be flipped. A breeze slid across the lawn, ruffling his tie, and Rosalind caught herself holding her breath, torn between the hope that his success might one day circle back to fold her into his arms and the aching certainty that his rise had come at her expense. Should she reach across the table now and demand the warmth they once had, or simply step back, swallow the hurt, and watch the man she loved slip further into his gilded world without her? That night, a soft hush had settled over Rosalind's apartment, and she stood in the hallway, clutching a steaming mug of chamomile tea as distant laughter drifted through the slightly ajar door of the study. She had planned a quiet evening alone with her thoughts, maybe a few pages of a novel, but instead she froze at the sound of a voice that wasn't hers, a smooth, familiar voice laced with unspoken secrets. Jerome's laughter floated through the thin walls alongside another voice, warm and teasing, calling him by a name that did not belong to her. Her heart tightened, and she pressed her ear closer, the steam from her mug fogging the polished brass knob as her fingers trembled. Veronica, the woman she had sometimes noticed in their social circle, was leaning in close. Rosalind could almost picture the sway of her dark hair, catching the lamplight as she brushed back a loose strand while sipping Jerome's expensive single malt. She closed her eyes, trying to convince herself she had misheard, but the words came clear as glass. "You really care about me?" Veronica had murmured, the promise in her tone sickeningly intimate. "I need you," Jerome had replied, his voice low and certain. Rosalind felt the world shift beneath her feet, her bones hollow with shock as she lowered herself to the plush rug, holding the mug to her chest like a lifeline. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to burst in and demand the truth, but she stayed rooted to the spot, her mind whirling with betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, she slipped away from the door, her mug abandoned on the console, and retreated to the sitting room where she could think her next move. She sat before the antique record player, its soft glow inviting, but she couldn't bear the music. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket for her phone and flicked through files until she found the small recording she had made of an earlier conversation with Jerome, an offhand remark about diverting funds from their joint account to cover surprise expenses for someone special. The recording crackled with Jerome's voice, admitting he had taken tens of thousands of dollars without her knowledge. Her chest tightened again as she played back the admission, her breath hitching in her throat. The betrayal stung twice over, one for the affair, another for the deceit. She felt tears welling, but an ember of resolve glowed within her, sharper than any grief. In that moment, she realized her trust had shattered, but so had the woman she once was. She had depended on him for so long, on his steady voice, his gentle confidence, only to discover it had all been a carefully crafted illusion. Her identity swirled in the storm of thoughts. Did she deserve this humiliation? Could she ever forgive? Or was this the tipping point that would finally free her from a world built on lies? Slowly, she rose and padded across the room to the bookshelf, where she had stashed an envelope filled with every receipt, every bank statement she had ever collected, evidence of Jerome's financial maneuvers, and the proof of Veronica's frequent visits. She flipped on the desk lamp and laid out the papers like a map of their crumbling life together. Each line of numbers looked black and sterile on the white paper, but to Rosalind, they felt like scars etched into her mind. She traced her fingertip along one particular transfer, a wire routed at midnight the week before, and felt a sudden clarity. She would not be the silent victim. She would not swallow the hurt in the corners of her heart and watch him slip away into his gilded world without so much as a goodbye. With the envelope in one hand and the recording in the other, she considered her next step. Should she confront him here in the privacy of their home and demand he answer for every betrayal? Or should she gather her evidence and take it public, exposing his lies to the friends they shared and the community that had admired their partnership? The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins, mingling with the sting of tears that threatened to fall. She placed the recording on the desk and leaned over, finger hovering above the play button of her laptop, where she had drafted a letter to her closest confidants, a draft for the social column that would reveal Jerome's misconduct to the world. The lamp cast her profile in sharp relief against the darkened window, and she saw in her own eyes not the woman who had once sought comfort in his arms, but a new figure emerging, resolute, unafraid, ready to reclaim her story. As the clock ticked softly on the mantel, she took a steady breath and reached out for the envelope, her decision crystallizing in the still air. As Rosalind gathered the papers, a resolute smile curved her lips, not triumphant in a gloating way, but serene as someone who had reclaimed her voice at last. She stepped away from the microphone, letting the gravity of her actions settle into silence, and in that pregnant stillness, she felt something gentle and fierce stir within her. The knowledge that she could fight for justice, even if the road ahead was uncertain. Distant laughter after the reveal was edged with questions rather than celebration, and the soft clink of crystal glasses felt like applause in its own right, heralding the start of a new chapter where Rosalind refused to be defined by betrayal. Months later, Rosalind stood backstage in the vast conference hall, the hush of anticipation wrapping around her like a gentle shawl as vendors bustled near the entrance and the scent of warm coffee mingled with the crisp new books on display. She could feel the weight of all those months of rebuilding pressing in her chest, the echo of old doubts tugging at her resolve, but she also felt something stronger, a pulse of purpose that had grown with every step she had taken since the betrayal that once shattered her world. In her hand, She clutched the pages of her speech, edges soft from folding and creasing in moments of midnight reworking, when fear had seeped into her thoughts, threatening to drown out the conviction she had discovered in her own truth. Her heart fluttered like a bird, just learning its wings, yet she had come too far to turn away now. Out in the audience, chairs filled one by one with women who had traveled from towns and cities near and far, seeking stories of survival and renewal, and Rosalind imagined their hopes and hesitations mirrored her own. She remembered the first time she had dared to speak her pain aloud in a quiet room filled with kind strangers, her voice trembling as she recounted days of confusion and nights of tears. That morning, she had barely recognized herself. Now she felt rooted, her feet anchored by the knowledge that she had unraveled every shard of shame to build something stronger in its place. When the announcer's voice finally echoed through the speakers, calling her name, her breath caught for a heartbeat, and she paused, recalling the moment her world had split apart under a harsh confession. She felt the old ache of vulnerability rise up, but she summoned a slow, steadying breath and stepped into the light. The stage glowed warmly, a soft halo around her silhouette, and the murmur of the crowd fell away as she approached the podium. For a fleeting instant, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the stories of every woman who had reached out to her in letters and online messages, stories of heartbreak and resilience, of nights spent questioning worth and days spent proving it. Those voices swelled inside her, a chorus of courage that displaced the last remnants of fear. With a gentle tap on the microphone, she began. Her voice carried through the hall, clear and unwavering, recounting the moment she had stood alone in a hotel room, discovering betrayal etched across a phone screen, and the long path of gathering broken pieces, one trembling hand at a time. She described how she had learned to breathe again, how she had filled blank pages with her fears until the words formed a bridge, carrying her to a new horizon. She painted in vivid strokes the sight of early morning light filtering through her apartment window, the sound of birdsong that had once felt jarringly bright, but now heralded each day as a gift. She spoke of the friends who had wrapped her in warmth when she wavered, the strangers who had offered care when she reached out with an honest plea for advice, and the quiet moments she had spent staring at her reflection, learning to see not the wound, but the strength that had healed around it. As she wove each detail into her narrative, she watched faces soften, saw tears well in the corners of eyes, and noticed tension in shoulders ebb into quiet relief. Her words resonated, and suddenly the hall felt almost sacred, like a gathering beneath an open sky where every heart bared its truth without shame. When she reached the end of her story, the room remained silent for the barest breath, as if all the women held collective breath, savoring each note of her journey. Then, like the swelling of a distant tide, applause rose, full and clear and generous, echoing off high ceilings as women rose to their feet, some chanting her name, others reaching out to touch the air in front of them, as though grasping at the hope she had offered. Rosalind lowered her eyes for a moment, letting gratitude wash through her, noticing the tremor in her own hands that now felt alive with purpose rather than fear. One by one, women approached afterward, offering embraces that left her jacket damp with tears, sharing stories of mornings when they had dared to open their own journals, of days when they had whispered new affirmations before the mirror, of nights when they finally believed that surviving meant more than enduring, but meant rising. A young mother pressed a worn photograph into her palm, describing how Rosalind's words had helped her see worth beyond exhaustion and fear. And an elderly teacher brushed her arm, declaring that she would carry this story into classrooms to remind girls that they were whole. As Rosalind stepped off the stage, the hum of conversation followed her like a gentle stream, and she felt a stirring question rise. Had she simply ended one chapter? Or was she now at the threshold of something far larger? an invitation to walk alongside countless women on their paths to healing. In that moment, she realized that her greatest victory had not been finding peace alone, but lighting the flame that others could follow, and she smiled into the bright conference lights, certain that her journey had only just begun.